Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce Differently podcast. This is our latest episode in our series of divorce talks with Erwin Mitchell. And today we're going to talk about family mediation, and more specifically, what to do to make sure it leads to an agreement. Now, mediation is often described as a simple conversation, but for most people, it's one of the hardest parts of separation. You're expected to make big, life-shaping decisions while managing fear, uncertainty, and often strained communication. So in this episode, we're going to explore what actually makes mediation successful and why preparation and mindset matter far more than people realize. To discuss this topic, I've invited Joanna Gosling. After 30 years in journalism, including 23 years as chief news anchor at the BBC, Joanna qualified as a family mediator in 2022. Her passion for helping people navigate conflict led her down this path, having witnessed firsthand the emotional, financial, and practical toll of litigation. Joanna's work focuses on the emotional dynamics of disputes and improving communication. Welcome, Joanna. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you've been in the trenches, so to say, to speak, with working with couples day in and day out. And I'm sure you've seen examples of when it really goes well and when it really goes wrong. So let's start with the positive. What would be the key ingredients of when you've seen a mediation work beautifully?
Just to pick up actually on, it goes right back to the premise of what's going to be happening and the mindset going into it. And so what you were saying there, Chloe, about it being a conversation, that is absolutely it. And I always say, it is just a conversation, and it's a great opportunity to explore things that you just haven't been able to resolve. But there is a huge amount of fear around it. And I think sort of like trying to take the fear out of it from the beginning by being clear that it's a conversation, but it's not a definitive one. It's not the end point. It's the start of a process. And obviously when people are going through a divorce, a very difficult situation, it's about building trust as much as anything. There are so many different permutations to what goes on in a mediation. It can be a straightforward financial situation that needs to get resolved, but it's mostly, more complicated than that. And just all the concerns, the issues behind the positions. So when does it go right? What are the factors in when it goes right? I think first of all, making sure that there is a mindset to understand what a mediation is and what it isn't going in.
Yeah.
It's sort of parking the digging in, the fighting. I need to protect my position because if I concede anything, I'm going to lose that, and I might end up with something that falls short of what I need, which then speaks directly to what the mediation actually is, which is it's about the needs, the priorities, the concerns. And so once you really start to understand those and you support each person in being able to make their position clear by speaking clearly to those rather than to the other, and rather than to the other in the context of we're here because you always, all that sort of stuff, and just trying to take things into that place of it's about a problem solving mindset. We're in this situation that neither of us want to be in. It's extremely difficult, it's extremely uncomfortable. We can come through it by listening to understand, by speaking clearly around what we need. Obviously the mediator is absolutely there supporting that, and so that's when things start to really go well, when it's focused on what the different options are, being very clear about what needs to get resolved, what needs to be answered, and exploring the different options in getting there. So even if it's sometimes something that one person will say, well, I know that's completely wrong, and it may or may not be, but the person that's perhaps putting it forward that doesn't see the other perspective, it's just, you by working through the different options, it's extremely helpful. And that's where you start to really bottom out what the priorities are, what the concerns are, and get to a place of we've explored everything, and actually we can walk away now with something that we can live with. That's the goal that you want to get to.
Absolutely. And I think there is often a misunderstanding around the role of the mediator in that sense, where people go to mediation expecting it to be sort of a mini courtroom, and they have to win the heart and mind of the mediator and somehow come up with really good arguments. And something that people don't realize is that mediation is not a debate. It's not about winning the argument, and it's not a court setting. The mediator is neutral, right? And the idea there is to come in with some ideas, some suggestions, some food for thought that can foster that solutioning that can happen when people put their heads together and try and solve a joint problem.
Definitely. And as you say, it is a joint problem. It's like, you want to, you're really serving yourself best by understanding what the other person needs from you and vice versa, rather than getting someone to tell the other person that they're wrong, which is often what's
Which is
going
what people want.
on. Yeah. And,
Exactly.
understandably so, sometimes because obviously they've been, caught in frustration and difficulty for such a long period of time, getting exasperated by the dynamic that they have, and they just want, the sort of simple way out is for someone to say, right, you're wrong,
Yeah.
and do it differently. But it just doesn't work like that. But it can work differently when you can get to that place of seeing, oh, I see, that's why they're digging in about that, that's why they're confused, or
Hmm.
they're afraid of that. Oh gosh, well, I didn't see it that way at all. It's just all of that. It just
Yeah.
becomes a very different place. Um, so yeah, 'cause supporting both in that is important, and the impartiality thing I always think is really interesting, because there's always a fear, or often a fear from people, that what if the mediator actually thinks the other person's right? They take their side.
Yes, I hear that a lot.
Yeah,
Or,
and
or my ex is going to charm them, or that kind of sense.
exactly. And it's like, I mean, genuinely, as as a mediator, you hear what each person's saying, and that is exactly that they're speaking to their experience, their perception of their experience. And it's not about, you're not going to be there digging into doing some sort of forensic uncovering, but you are there to support both people who are in a vulnerable place, who need to be able to move forward.
Yeah.
And in that, you're not taking sides, and you wouldn't do either a favor by taking a side, because what you then end up with is an outcome where they don't both feel, okay, we've explored everything, and they each feel, I can move forward with this will be sustainable because I understand why we've reached this outcome.
Yeah.
The alternative is it feels like it's been sort of driven by someone else or imposed in a different forum or whatever, and then in that context it is not always easy to make it stick, because the understanding isn't there.
I agree. And do you find that mediation works better when people get on, or can it actually work well even if they're, really struggling to look at each other?
I think you don't have to get on as in be great friends, and that would be that's not going to happen, in the heat of things at the start. It can happen. Obviously, we know Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin very famously conscious uncoupling, but they've spoken about it, or she's spoken about it, and it wasn't just a straightforward, right,
No,
let's
it
be
never
buddies
is.
right now. That requires deciding what your priority is going to be. And in that case, it's right, we're prioritizing the children, we're prioritizing them not getting caught up in our own disagreement, and remembering that and rooting yourself in that as you go. So in terms of expecting people to suddenly be friends, it's not that. But it is also true that they need to communicate almost better than they ever have. And
That's the
that,
challenge.
yeah, that is a
Yeah.
challenge. And that's why the mediator's there to support that. And what that looks like is not fighting for a position again, because again, a fear that often comes up is, well, my ex is negotiates all the time at work. They're a
I
brilliant
hear that so
negotiator.
often.
How am I going to sort of come up against that? And what that communication actually looks like is not like, becoming some master debater and having to make your arguments really clearly. It's being able to be honest about with yourself and with the other about, well, look, the reason I'm asking for this is because I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to pay my bills. So can
Yeah.
we just please explore what's needed here, what the requirements are, so that, I want you to understand where I'm coming. And it's a very different form of communication,
Yeah, it
but
really is.
it's not the form of communication that's necessarily front and center uh, when we go into a conflict.
And usually, I mean, in most couples, the reason they are divorcing to start with is because communication has broken down. So it's even harder to pick it up at that stage. But that actually takes us quite nicely into my next question, which was the flip side of that. What can go wrong? What is it that makes a mediation go wrong? And is there an element in that relationship between the two that could just make that communication impossible?
Yes, in that if, well, if two people are so dug in and just unwilling to open mind to finding a middle way through, and they're just so determined to sit with, I'm absolutely right on this, and we're going
Yeah,
to go to court come what may, because I'm convinced that I'm going to be right and that the judge is
yeah,
going to side with me. But that said, even in those, generally, because the other factors that come into play there are, well, what are the potential outcomes of that? Two people are there getting different advice or taking a different view, and a judge will come in and might will take another different view, or
yeah.
it's there's no guarantee in the outcome. There's also, in conflict, it's not just about the sort of financial costs of where that's going to go, depending on which route you take, but it's
Mhm.
the emotional toll.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes, the emotional toll will be speaking more, the factors will be weighed up differently. So the emotional toll, the going to bed every night with it, the waking up every morning, or the costs. And again, part of a mediation is, well, let's look at the costs of this. How's that weighing up against what is actually in the pot?
Yes.
You're arguing over this, but that could get swallowed up by that. So there are ways to support a reflection that will, hopefully break down
Yeah.
the resistance to having a more of an open mind. But I mean, there are sometimes situations where even getting to the start point is not possible to even start a
Yeah.
mediation.
Yeah, if there's no open conversation, basically, if they're both completely stuck on their positions,
Yeah, they're not
then it's
actually
really
open
difficult.
to what. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And is there a piece around timing as well where people attend mediation and potentially people coming too late or too soon to the table?
So I think with financial mediation, it is really important that you've got the facts kind of nailed down. So the financial disclosure, any valuations, because those are the materially important bits that you can't have a proper discussion until you know exactly what is there with
Yeah.
open disclosure. That said, it can be super helpful to start a mediation early on, as soon as possible, to at least sort of start the process as being,
Hmm.
we're rooting this in this mindset, a
Yes.
collaborative one, and a desire to work things through with discussion.
Yeah.
So to start that, to start the process with that mindset is very helpful.
Yeah.
So even if it requires, okay, right, we start here. These are the sort of principles of how we're going to do it. These are the, let's look at what a sort of skeleton outlook on the financial issues might be at this point, but obviously nothing can get nailed down until all the facts are in.
Yeah.
So go off and do that disclosure. It's different with children. Again, that as soon as possible is absolutely right before things get acrimonious.
Yeah.
And it depends on the context. I mean, mostly I mediate with families, but do other contexts as well where it's less about the relationships, and it is more of a sort of business issue.
Yeah.
In that case, you are much more at that end of, well, you need to have got the ducks in a row before you go into it. So I'd
Yes.
say
Yes.
wherever relationships are at stake, as soon as possible is just always good.
Yeah. And then there's a piece around emotional preparation as well, and actually all types of preparation for mediation. You and I are both familiar with pre-mediation coaching and the value it can bring to people to make sure that they really make the most of those sessions. What would be your tips around that?
I mean, just sort of in a nutshell, it's identifying the goal initially. The sort of the North Star. So
Mhm.
the what is the well, back to the sort of Gwyneth Paltrow, Chris Martin, their North Star was, we are going to do this well for
Yeah.
our children. So
Hmm.
even when they kind of, even when, if you lose your way through a difficult negotiation, it's like, that's the sort of laminated sentence to
Yes.
cling on to and go back to. So, that sort of outlining a mindset as to what that priority is, understanding your own, what's going on for you, understanding why it is that something matters to you,
Yeah.
and that is really important to explore because it's not always obvious necessarily. So
Yeah.
you do that, and then how to articulate well. So back to what I said about the not the finger pointing and I'm articulating what matters to me,
Yes.
not what I think about you in brackets,
Yeah. Yeah.
because that's the bit that leads to massive defensiveness and vice versa. And so then also listening well, and
Yes.
so
That's definitely part of it.
yeah. So it's basically it's knowing yourself, listening well, and being curious. And I think that
Yeah.
those things are pretty well going to see you through.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess there's the part as well that you were talking about earlier, which is more the logistical preparation, making sure you have the right numbers ready. You understand whether you can even afford to take over the house if you would get a mortgage, those kind of things. There's a lot of value in doing that upfront. So you're not negotiating based on theories, but you have the right information to make sure it's actually viable.
Definitely. Yeah.
And how do you deal as a mediator, with the emotions in the room? Because they're inevitable in those kind of contexts. And when you've got one of the two who is particularly angry or hurt or just, really struggling with the conversation at hand, how do you help them manage that?
Well, I think always if a pause is necessary, that's important, because it is going to, difficult things will come up.
Yeah.
So, and they can come up obviously in different ways. We're all the same in any difficult scenario. It's like
Yeah.
something will be upsetting and it will trigger, sadness or whatever, or it can be triggering in an annoyance flashpoint way.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's giving the space, it's supporting the framing of a conversation in a way that is, well, hang on, when you say that, this is what I'm hearing. You as the mediator can sort of step in to get some clarification,
Hmm.
picking up where, because sometimes someone will say something that's actually really thoughtful about the situation and will then go on to say something else that demolishes it. So you're sort of trying to pull back to those golden threads so
Yeah.
that that's where the focus gets steered to again. So it's not trying to keep emotions out of it, but it's sort of letting that breathe, but it's also keeping it forward focused and keeping
Yeah.
it in a place of understanding that things have obviously gone on. You're not going to resolve those in the mediation. The
Yeah.
goal of the mediation is about getting people through. It's forward focused, and it's sort of always steering it back to that. Right? Let's look at the practical
Yeah.
facts.
And that's where, again, some of that preparation comes in, right? Because for the people going to mediation, if they know they're easily triggered by X or Y comment their ex might make, for you as a mediator, it might seem like just a comment in passing, but to them, it's incredibly triggering. And being aware of that, learning how to avoid falling into the trap of reacting to it, and just having that awareness is going to help them as well stay on track and lead the conversation to completion.
And depending on the situation, you can do a shuttle mediation or you
Hmm.
can do it all in the same space. And shuttle can be extremely helpful where
Yeah.
a situation is very highly charged emotionally, or
Mm.
they are going to speak to each other in a way that's going to be triggering. It can be helpful to keep it separated out. That said, where it's about building bridges, because there are children involved,
Hmm.
and while it's, back to what we were saying about friendships, while it's not about building the friendship, it's about building an understanding of how they can get to a place to co-parent the children in a way that it's very child focused.
Yes.
And that is, can be obviously best supported if they are able to have those conversations directly with each other, albeit obviously
Yeah.
with the support of the mediator
Yeah.
to manage them.
And it's also a skill they're learning for the future, because there's going to probably be hundreds more decisions they need to make with regards to the children. And some of them might warrant going back to mediation, but there's a lot of day-to-day decisions that, you're going to just have to deal with. So it's
Yeah.
it's also a skill for them to acquire.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely something I'm always really conscious of with the mediation, hoping that it's not just about sorting out what's on the table in that
Hmm.
moment. It's about people leaving ultimately thinking, okay, we've actually sort of been able to communicate a bit differently there, and hopefully that will continue and make
Exactly.
it sustainable. Yeah.
And one of the beauties of mediation is that there's a lot more options for creativity, right? A court, and a judge would probably look at things in a fairly simplistic way. They look for a straightforward solution. Whereas when it's the couple who are dealing with the problem and trying to build the solution, there's all sorts of solutions that can come up. And I would imagine that's a very stimulating part of your job, is helping people think outside the box and come up with more creative solutions to their issues.
Definitely. I mean, the neatest way to sort of encapsulate this is something from mediation training, and it's
Yeah.
it's simplistic, but it says a lot about. So basically, parent comes home, children arguing over an orange, and
Yeah.
they each want the orange. So the parent, like exhausted at the end of the day, right, takes the orange, cuts it in half. There you go. You've each got half now. Stop
Yeah.
fighting. And then they're like, "What? Why did you do that? You never listened to us." Turns out one of them wanted the pith to make a cake, and the other one wanted, sorry, not the pith, the zest, and
Yeah.
the other one wanted the juice to
Mhm.
drink. So they could have actually both had, one could have had the 100% of the zest, and the other
Yeah.
one could have had 100% of the juice. And it's back to the exploring what's going
Yeah.
on behind the positions, and yeah, that
Yes.
that doesn't happen in an oppositional process.
And I think that's exactly where those conversations become so important. It's not just about pushing your point of view and trying to get the other to buy into your position. It's what's behind that position. And that's when you start entering that realm of options and possibilities.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
And one last question, which is something that I think people don't always think of. First of all, I think in the preparation stage, defining what success looks like, what would a good outcome look like to you, is really important. But also for people to understand that it's not necessarily an all or nothing proposition, and that sometimes just getting partial success can be the start of success and take you towards resolution. Could you talk to us a bit about that?
Definitely. And I've definitely seen that where you you'll get certain things resolved, but not everything. And
Yeah.
it can start, but it is the start of a process in that it shows what's possible, and it's changing the dynamic of how things get sorted. So it's
Hmm.
taking things away from it's a black and white context to
Yeah.
actually it's a possibility of just, one conversation leads to another. And there is often that sense, we've all had that thing where something's happened and you think afterwards, I wish I'd said that. And it's, it sort of puts, has, there's a bit of a mindset of, oh, I missed my moment. But with a mediation and taking you into that sphere of, well, I didn't say it then, but I can say it. I can say it now. That's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not over. It's just an ongoing process, and things
Hmm.
can continue to evolve, and they will, because
Yeah.
finances get locked down. Children don't. Children's
Hmm.
needs will be constantly changing, and so yeah, you can keep going on and revisiting as necessary.
Yeah. And again, the definition of success is so subjective, isn't it?
Mm.
For one of the two, it might be a specific number they have in mind with the regards to the financial settlement, whereas for another, it might be the fact that they managed to reach an agreement within 2 or 3 sessions,
Yeah,
or that that it feels fair. It can be very very subjective in that sense. But having that defined is really important up front, because then you know when you're done. You know when you've reached an acceptable agreement.
definitely.
So, Joanna, before we part ways, could you share your top 3 tips? So, people heading into mediation, what would be your 3 tips to make sure that they reap the benefits of that effort?
Reflect before you go in about what your priorities and your concerns and are, so
Hmm.
that you know your needs and your priorities, and that gives you a good negotiating base, really, to speak with purpose and
Yeah.
to move things forward. Listen well, so be prepared, go in open-minded,
Hmm.
and listen to understand, because you want the other
I
person
agree.
to do that for you, so you need to do that.
Absolutely.
And be curious. So if you
Hmm.
don't understand something, it's questions, and that just, the questions will lead to more questions, will lead to
Yeah.
a shift, and that starts to find the way through. So probably it's reflect, open-minded, curious.
I love that last bit around questions. I think people underestimate the power of questions. First of all, the information you gather from what the other person cares about and the options that it opens up, but even the message that it sends to the other person when you're asking,
Mm,
you're not dismissing, you're not rejecting their ideas. You're
mm,
actually showing that you're willing to listen, that you want to understand, and just that is so conducive to
mm,
trying to find a solution together. So
mm.
I think that's a brilliant tip.
And on that, actually, I think it can be anything. A question. It can be I'm feeling completely stuck now. What do
Yeah.
we what do we do? And
Hmm.
that could be a really helpful thing, because it suddenly, the other person, instead of you're both being like, "Well, I'm stuck," it triggers that part of the brain to think, "What can we do?"
Yeah.
So just in even a simple question like that can start to shift a dynamic.
I love that. All right. So, for our listeners, take that little nugget away. Ask questions. It's definitely one of the keys. Thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you for joining me today.
That's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Chloe.